with a personal illness of a close family member, and that was probably worse than me even dealing with something personally. Like I remember there was a time to where my grandmother was extremely ill, and a lot of times when you're younger, families don't want to tell you the truth. And I ended up finding out that she had cancer, and she was actually in the last stages by the time that I actually found out about it, and I was off at college. And I actually didn't even want to go back to school because this was a person that was like the most important person in my whole life. And my family ended up talking me into going back to school, saying I can just come home on the weekends and so on and so forth. And it was one Tuesday or Wednesday that my dad and someone else actually appeared to my school, and I knew like they're here during the week. I knew something had happened, and that always messed with me that she died and I wasn't there because I really didn't want to go back, but they just kept telling me that like this is a part of life. You can't just stop every time something happens. So yeah, so no, me personally, no, but someone that I love more than anything in the world, yeah.
So did it derail your focus in any way, and how did you regain your focus?
It derailed my focus in a lot of ways because, like, being 18, 19 years old, and, like, my grandmother was, like, one of the most important people in my life other than my mother and father. I didn't even think I can live without her. I didn't even know how to live without her. So, yeah, it took a whole lot of time. And I ended up going back to school, and I, thank God, had really good friends that loved on me because I was, of course, sad. I was depressed. I didn't really know what to do. I wasn't focused at school because that she was the first person to ever die that was close to me, for one, and then I didn't know how to move on without her because I never in a million years imagined I would have to. So yeah, it took a lot of time. It took a good support system of people that cared about me, that was there for when I wanted to cry, there for when I didn't want to talk, that just was there for me and whatever I needed, and that really helped me.
Corinne?
And I guess the only time that I can think of where illness played a part was I was bleeding internally at one point, and I had to have emergency surgery. So afterwards, I couldn't work for 2 months. So with not being able to work for 2 months, it definitely derailed me and set me back and having to, recover.
So how were you able to regain your focus?
How was I able to regain? I guess during, just being able to, because actually, while during that time, I lost my, basically, not that I lost my job due to me being fired, but my job no longer exists by the time I was able to recover. Yeah, I guess being motivated to want to work the whole time, it wasn't because I didn't want to work, it's just that at the time I couldn't physically work. This is way before I started working from home. So at this point, I was used to working in an office. But, eventually I did recover, and I had a spouse that they were able to help with finances as well. So I was able to eventually bounce back.
Nice. Okay. I have experienced some illness in the past, but it wasn't really an illness, more of like a bodily injury. When I had my second child, when I was giving birth, while I was in labor, I injured my lower back, and it has not been the same ever since. But I was in some very severe pain for the first couple months after I had her. I could only walk for short periods of time without having to rest and take a break because the pain would be so severe. And at the time, how I handled it was I basically just, walked when I could, took breaks when I could. Sometimes I would take ibuprofen for the pain, but I don't like taking pills. I didn't like taking painkillers, and so most of the time I just was in pain. So I just sort of pushed through it and kept moving and kept going. So it wasn't really an illness. It was just more of like a physical malady, I guess. Okay, so we're going to go on to the last question, which is tragic loss. The number one reason for derailment of focus is tragic loss, and I think that each of us on the line have experienced tragic loss. Death is considered probably the most well-known tragic loss, but there's also romantic loss. There's divorce and there's separation. Death, divorce, and separation are tragic losses that can create a grief that can be so intense that it derails focus. The best way to overcome this is to get constant support, someone who can comfort and check on you as you work through your grief. Counseling is also the best way to work through deep grief issues dealing with tragic loss. At these times, working toward healing is where your focus should be. New goals and a revived focus will happen when you are healed and ready. So the question is this: have you ever experienced tragic loss that derailed your focus? How did you work through your grief? And were you able to regain your focus? Chanel, would you like to go first?
Sure. The tragic loss that I would speak to is my support system when I divorced. When I decided to separate from my husband, all of our friends were married. We were friends prior to marriage, prior to having children, and everybody picked a side. And so that was very, very painful. Most of those people I'm not friends with today, just because I didn't want to put anyone in the position of choosing, but my ex did. So I just had to let go. And I'm living in an area that I'm not from originally. I'm originally from the South, and I'm in the D.C. metropolitan area. So it was a very isolating time. I just really had to focus on, like I said before, redefining my life, being open to new connections, friendships and relationships, and that mostly began with my relocation to a different area and meeting new neighbors, and it starts all over again.
Right. How long was it before you were able to regain your focus?
It probably took me a couple years. I started to make connections with neighbors almost right away, but because I was going through that, I didn't allow a lot of people in. So that was more of just being cordial and trying to appear normal during that period. But it probably took me a couple of years before I really got to a good place.
Uh-huh. Okay. So allowing yourself to take that time is probably the most important thing, because healing doesn't come in a day.
I really wish it could.
Right.
Yeah.
Tawanda?
Hello, ma'am. I really have
Hi.
to ditto what Chanel said. I guess to share something that I hadn't already shared before, it would have to be the same thing with a relationship. It wasn't marriage, though. Just a long-term relationship that was ending that took a major life toll on me, and it actually took me a few years, like 3 or 4, to be able to really bounce back from that situation. And I learned a lot through that, because sometimes you just don't realize that the heart, and when you care about somebody, is just so powerful that you just can't bounce right back. So that would be what I wanted to share.
Right. How do if you've experienced that same tragic loss that derailed your focus, how did you work through your grief, and were you able to regain your focus? And I think you touched a little bit on this with some of your earlier stories. But if you have any other new points you'd like to speak on.
Yeah, I don't have anything new because it's really all about time. And that's the only thing. Like Chanel talked about with like having friends and being cordial, I went through that too, because sometimes you really don't want to talk to anybody. You just know you can't be reclusive. But and even some people I did talk to, they had no idea what was actually happening or what I had actually went through, because people are apathetic. Plus, you don't really want people put people in your business and so on and so forth. But and it was definitely an uphill battle. I definitely would not sugarcoat that. But time does heal wounds and broken hearts.
Corinne?
Can I add something else? This is Chanel.
Sure, go ahead.
So to mine, I had to forgive. I had to forgive the friends who chose to take sides. And I had to allow them to have their opinion. No matter how close you are to your friends, there's always a life that's not exposed to them. If you don't live with somebody, you don't really know them completely inside and out as much as you may think. So I was really shocked by some of the friends who took sides. But I had to get to a place where I just, agree to disagree, respect their opinion, that they have a right to have an opinion, and just walk away peacefully for my own sanity. Some of us try to come back together, but it just, with, them still maybe being friends with my ex, and then, things are happening, and then somebody feels left out, or you start to feel that push and pull of loyalty with one or the other. So I just had to accept that this is just a part of life. Change is a part of life. We, as much change as we experience in life, for some reason, many times it's very hard, but change is normal. Life is dynamic. No day is the same. So I don't know why it's so difficult for us to embrace that change happens. It's just going to be.
Right.
But I have to get.
And I like that you. Go ahead.
No, I said, but I had to get to that place.
Right. And I like that you said that you brought up the topic of forgiveness, because we often don't realize that forgiveness is a huge part of healing when it comes to grief. Just in my own experience with tragic loss, and the loss of my husband when he passed away, sometimes you're angry at people, and it's not like it's actually their fault. Like sometimes bad things happen and it's no one's fault, but you want to blame you want to put that anger somewhere. And I experienced a lot of that when my husband passed away. People who were angry at me, I was angry at others. There was just a lot of anger because there's so much helplessness that you can't, and there's no way you can fix it or change it. It just is what it is. And forgiveness is the only way to move past that state. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because forgiveness is always like a huge part of healing, in some cases with death and tragic separation. So, Corinne?
Yes. Can you just
Did you answer the question? Okay. Have you ever experienced tragic loss that derailed your focus? How did you work through your grief, and were you able to regain your focus?
Yeah, and yes, I think I previously spoke about this before, and I think it is hard to regain focus once like you lose anything that's like constant and that you're used to and accustomed to having, especially if it's someone that, you know, you had your whole life